In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the code that's required in order to provide an administrative UI for our entity. We've now got the ability to store entities in the database, but it'd be great if we could make it so that someone could add an entity by just filling out a form and clicking the Save button. The Entity API provides us with a lot of it for free, but not everything. So we're going to take a look at the pieces that we get for free just by adding our UI controller. And then we're going to take a look at what we need to do in order to fill in the rest of the gaps, like creating a form that someone can fill out and providing validation and submit handlers for our form. So let's go ahead and get started with providing an administrative UI for our video entity. In order to provide an administrative UI for our new video entity, we need to make a couple of changes to our hook entity info implementation. Mostly, we're going to be working with this key here, the admin space UI, and the arguments underneath it. I wanted to point out that this specific key here is actually provided by the entity module from contrib. So you're not going to find documentation about this on api.drupal.org. Instead, you should look at the entity.api.php file that comes with the entity module from contrib, which provides documentation about the extensions that it's added to hook entity info. They happen to be right at the top of the file, so if you scroll down this file a bit, you'll see that there's a set of additional keys that it's added, and one of them is this admin UI, optional, an array of information used to provide an administrative user interface. So we're going to make use of this and basically walk through all the things that it's asking us to do, including add a path where we'd like the UI to show up, create a form that someone can use to fill out and create a new entity, and some permissions associated with that. So let's go ahead and get started with those things. If we switch back to our video entity.module file, I'm actually going to change the path here first. I'd like our path to just be admin/video entity. I want to add a new tab at the top of Drupal's toolbar, so top level, in line with things like the appearance tab and the current content tab is where we'd like our videos to start showing up. Other than that, I'm going to leave everything here the same for now. I am going to add one additional piece of information right below this. I'm going to add a key for module, and I'm just going to give it the name of our module. The reason for this is that inside of the video entity UI controller, or really the default UI controller, there's some code that deals with determining where these paths should live and which module should contain the file that has the form in it that we're going to create. So I need to make sure that I tell it that the module for this entity, or the controlling module of our video entity, is the video entity module. And then I'm going to add a new key under admin UI here. I'm going to add a key of file, and I'm just going to say video entity.admin.inc. So the combination of this line at 41 and this line at 43 means that we can now create a form for our entity in a file named videoentity.admin.inc in the root of our video entity modules directory. Looking at the documentation for hook entity info and this admin UI, I also note that it tells me I need to provide an access callback. I need to control permissions for who can view, edit, update, delete our entity. So there's a little bit of legwork we need to do around that. The first thing is just providing a simple access callback in hook entity info. And no problem, we can do that here. We'll create a new function named video entity access callback, and then we can just scroll down and actually define that function. And our access callback function here is going to take a handful of arguments. These are passed in from the Entity API. The first argument is $op, or the operation that we're checking access for. So is this a view operation, or is this a create operation? The second argument is the video entity itself, if it exists. And the third argument is an optional user account that you would like to check access for. So this access callback function needs to return true or false. It works a lot like a menu access callback. In fact, it gets used in that way in a couple of scenarios with the entity API, which takes this information from our hook entity info and translates it into Drupal hook menu router items on our behalf without us having to do a whole bunch of work for all of the various different pages that we need. This callback is used to determine access to all of those pages. So I should probably also provide a set of permissions to go with this. So I'm going to implement hook permission in our module and define a couple of permissions for our video entity. We'll start out with a simple set of permissions. We can always add more if we need them in the future. I'm going to add an administer videos permission, and I'm going to add a view videos permission. And then I'm going to come down to our access callback, and I'm going to add a little bit of code where if the operation is view, then I want to check and see if the currently logged in user or the user passed in the account variable has the view videos permission. Like so. And I'll return true. Otherwise, no matter what the operation is, if the user has the administer videos permission, I'm going to let them perform that operation. And finally, I'm going to return false for users that do not have either view video permissions or administer videos. We could probably even take this one step further and add our administer videos check up here as well. And we can add a wrapper like so. There we go. So now we're checking to see if the operation is view and the currently logged in user has the view videos permission, or the user has administer videos permission, return true. Otherwise, whatever the operation is for create and delete and so forth, if they have administer videos permission, go ahead and let them do that. Otherwise, we'll return false and deny access to those pages. So now we've created a simple access callback. We've created a set of permissions, and we've told the entity API about the access callback that we just created. Let's switch over to our site and see what that's done for us. If I flush the cache, I'm going to config performance, clear all caches, you can now see that we've got a video menu item in the main set of tabs across the top of the page. And I can click on that and go to our new page at admin/video entity, which is exactly what we defined here as the admin UI. The entity API has gone ahead and generated a basic page that, if we had any entities in the system, would list all of those entities out for us, along with links to edit or delete them. We don't have any there currently though, so we're going to need to add some. This is a lot of that stuff that the entity API is providing us for free. So when I click on add video here, I would expect to see a form. However, what I'm seeing is an error. That's because we haven't yet created the file that contains that form or written the function for that form. When we're working with the entity API, we get a lot of the admin UI for free, but we still need to do the part where we actually create the form building function. So first, we need to create this file, videoentity.admin.inc. I'm going to do that. I'll create a new file, save it, and we're going to name it videoentity.admin.inc. So now, this should get rid of the problem of not finding the file. Great. However, it's still not able to actually find the form because we haven't written the function to define it yet. So the function that will automatically be called in order to build a form for our entity is entity type, so entity type underscore form. And it's just a standard form building function. So you get a form array and you get the form state along with the video itself if it exists. So for example, in the case where you're editing an already existing video, it's going to pass in that information to the form building function. So entity type here, we need to replace with the machine readable name of our entity type. In our case, this is video, and I know that because over in our implementation of hook entity info, the key that we used in the array here is video. So we'll go ahead and leave that as is. You'll notice that this is a little bit weird, since normally in Drupal, we're advised to name all of our functions with the name of our module, prefix with the name of our module. So this should be video entity underscore form, not video underscore form, because that would conflict with the video module if we were trying to use that. This is how the entity system works. We're going to leave it as is for now, and then in a lesson in the future, we'll talk about how we can override the default UI controller in order to make some changes that will allow us to change the name of this form to be appropriate for the actual name of our module. But for now, let's go ahead and leave it as is. Return form. And we need to use the form API to build out what that video entity creation form is going to look like. So if you remember, the thing that we're building this form for is so someone can edit the properties of a video entity. And those properties relate to our hook schema definition. Our video entity has properties like name, embed code, created at, updated at, and duration. Some of these you should be able to administer via the user interface, like the name and the embed code. But some of them, like the ID, that's just an auto increment value. So we don't want to add that to the form. And the created at and updated at columns, we could provide a form interface to add those dates, or we could just automatically populate those dates in a submit handler, or even better yet, in our entity controller. For now, we're going to focus on creating a form to let us add a name, an embed code, and a duration. So over in our form building function, I'll start adding those fields. I can add a name field. I'll create a new field that is of type text field and give it a label of name. The default value is set to the name property from our video entity if one's passed in, otherwise it's set to blank. So that allows us to edit it. I'll do the same with adding an embed code. Like so. We can say there's our embed code field, also required. And we said we wanted to add a duration field. So we'll go ahead and copy our embed code field, change the labels here to say duration. One thing that I want to point out here is that I've been careful to name all of my form fields after the property from the video entity. So I named the duration field, duration, embed code, and so forth. When we create our submit handler, we'll see that this is useful because it makes it so that the entity API can deal with the majority of parsing the form values and saving them into the entities table in our database. The last thing I need to do is add a submit button for our form. So I'm going to do that like so. All right, we've got a function to build our form. Let's take a look at this and see what it's done. If I switch back over to our site and refresh, I now see the form that I just created at this page with our name field, an embed code field, and a duration field, all three of which are required. And I can click save and save a new video asset into the database. However, there's another step I need to do before I can actually save this. I need to write a submit handler for our form. We just created a new form. We need to write a submit handler for it so that when somebody clicks the update video asset button or save video asset button, it knows how to save that information. I'm going to write that as. If you've ever worked with Drupal's form API, this part should be pretty familiar. A submit handler is just the name of the function that created the form underscore submit. And this will get called automatically when somebody submits our video form. Like so. So now, the normal way of doing this would be to parse all the values out of the $form underscore state array and save those to the database manually. With the entity API, we don't need to do that though. You remember that our entity controller has CRUD operations. It can build an entity and then we can just call save on that entity. We're going to make use of that in our code. There's a handy function provided by the entity module called entity UI form submit build entity. What this function does is it takes a form array and a form state that contains all the values and turns it into an entity object for us. So now my video entity object is actually using our controller. So I can actually just call video save. So I've built the object from the values in our form, save them to the database using the save operator. And then when I'm all done, I can just redirect the form. So save the entity and redirect the user back to our administration page. We might even want to add a helpful message here, like there we go. Now we've got a message that'll say the video name has been saved, and then redirect the user back to the administration page. Let's go and verify that this actually works. We switch back to our site, refresh, and I should be able to give our video a name. I'll just name it test video, and for now we'll make up an embed code. It might look something like this. And a duration, a number of seconds that this video is. We'll just say it's 100. Save. There you go. This is a test video, has been saved. You can see it's now showing up in the table. That table again is provided for us by free from the entity module. I can click edit to go and edit that video entity, and it takes me back to the form that I created, but now it's pre-populated with all the appropriate values. I could also optionally delete this video entity using the delete button. There's one other thing that I wanted to do here. Right now, our duration field is just a simple text field, but somebody shouldn't be able to enter in a string of text as a duration. We want to make sure that this is a numeric value. So let's quick add a validation handler. Again, the entity API provided us with a bunch of information for free and a bunch of functionality as well, but we still need to do things like build the form and validate the form on our own. The reason that we need to validate these ourselves is because the API can't really make any assumptions on our behalf about what the value of a field should be. Only we know that information. So it leaves it as an exercise to us. Again, this is just a simple standard form API validation function. I get the form array and the form state, and I simply check to see if the value is what I'm hoping for. The code to do that looks like this. And I can check and see if the duration field is set and is a numeric value. If it's not, I'm going to set an error on the duration field that says it must be an integer value. Simple enough. I'll go ahead and save that, switch back over to my site, refresh the page once, and try to add a new video here. Video name and embed code, and if I added in a duration like say 60 seconds and try to save this, it'll give me an error on that field telling me that it needs to be an integer. If I change it however to be a numeric value, it gets saved to the database just as we would expect. So that's a bunch of administrative features that we get mostly for free all we had to do was make a couple of changes to our module's hook entity info. We modified this admin UI key, changed the path, added a file so that we could have this form building function stored in another file. We had to deal with access control ourselves. And again, that's the kind of information that only we really know what's appropriate for our data. And then we created a form building function and the appropriate validation and submit handlers for that function. In the submit handler, we made use of this entity UI form submit build entity function to do the majority of the heavy lifting for us, return an entity that we can just save and call it a day.